idea for all this really came from a dream?
Yes, it did.
Good evening and welcome to Nox Mente. Tonight's guest is Laura Powers. Laura Powers is an actress, model, producer, host, writer, psychic, singer, and speaker who helps others receive guidance and communicate with loved ones. While she was building her psychic business, she was making her living as an actor. She now focuses on all things she loves to do. She has a television show in development and is currently producing her first film. Laura currently hosts several podcasts on design, music, the entertainment industry, writing, health, and spirituality, as well as business and empowerment. She has millions of listeners and viewers, and her audience is growing quickly. She's also the author and a writer with 7 published books and 3 more to be published next year. Man, busy. She is also shopping several screenplays, and a television pilot inspired by her work and life as a psychic. Laura is one of the premier psychics in Los Angeles, though she currently travels to see clients regularly in New York City and other cities all over the world. Prior to her work in this as a psychic, she studied theater at the University of Colorado and has a master's degree in political science and has worked and explored in a political, spiritual, and creative realm. She has worked in politics, government, higher education, and as an actress, cabaret singer, and a burlesque performer. Laura also works as a ghost whisperer and paranormal communicator and works as a consultant medium for a paranormal investigation group, Altitude Paranormal Group. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's definitely a great pleasure to have you here, Laura. I'm quite excited about this.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of energy behind this interview. I was just chatting to you guys before I got here that it's been an interesting day, kind of energetically. Here we are, Mercury in retrograde, all kinds of interesting shenanigans kind of happening. Yeah, but it's great to talk with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, and it's well timed up. For people that know, you weren't able to get on earlier, but I personally think this timing, as usual, is perfect. Here we are coming right out of the remembrance. We're in that season, remembrance of the dead and all that. And so it's like the time to have you on, in my opinion. This kind of like your shining time.
It is. Yeah. So October, November it's such a busy time for me, in terms of my work, and there's just so much activity. I love Halloween, all the things that are around the season, but it's a time of year when I feel like everyone is focusing on the dead, the other dimensions, the unseen. And so I love that. It's a special time of year. And I think things are brought to the surface also energetically for us to look at and observe, and sometimes to shift and release as well.
Yeah, it's what's great is collectively we allow that.
Yes.
And so and that's part of what makes the veil thinner, is like we're prepared collectively, and it's like this is the okay time to experience our ancestors, or even experience the spooky and the strange and the bizarre and the weird with the Y. So
isn't Mars square Pluto right now too?
Yes.
In conjunction with the retrograde? That's fucked up.
There's crazy astrology right now.
I feel like for the last several years there's been so many strange astrological things that it's almost like the normal thing is for everything.
It's almost like it's a simulation.
Well, there's been a big amping towards 2020, where there's some, there've been some really rare astrological events recently, and it does seem to be amping towards this year we're moving into, especially in February.
And I think too, you see those things as well as just some energetic things happening, like the Schumann resonance. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
Oh yes,
with that.
I call it the Tesla resonance.
Oh yeah,
and I think it's bullshit.
Like, so you do really? I don't know. I will feel strong, kind of psychic triggering, and feel really intense, and then I'll look, and sure enough, there was a spike on the Schumann resonance. But I'm an empath, and so I feel like I just pick up on both people's reaction to that shift, as well as even maybe the Earth itself and its feelings, or
I want to clarify.
with the Earth. Hmm.
I mean, I know it's a thing, but there's been no studies that show that that's, you know, anything other than a number and some. We don't know what that is, what that chart is, and what that data is. That's all I'm saying. So,
I
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
real sense that it for me it's real, and it's definitely got credence for me that Tesla is the one who first discovered it and talked about
Oh,
it.
that's interesting. I didn't know that about
Yeah.
Tesla, but all I know is when it spikes up, I feel it.
Yes, as
And
do
often,
I.
me too.
yeah. So whatever it is, something's happening.
Yeah, it's definitely some kind of resonance frequency that's going, but I don't know what the source of it is or how it's measured, and that's all I meant by it's kind of BS that people are all attached to it being a certain thing, and when it spikes, they're like, oh, it's, you know, the ascension or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Well, if you can feel it, if it quacks, it's a duck,
mm,
maybe.
mhm.
Anyway, so let's start the show, and we usually start with taking you way back to your earliest memories of what inspired you as far back as you can recall in the world. So, trying to build a foundation of Laura. So, things that seem maybe silly, but things like pop culture and did you have a relationship with nature? Those kinds of simple things as far back as you can recall.
Well, I think I have to go even farther back for me because my first memory is actually of the other side. So,
Oh, I love you.
ever since I was here, as Laura in the form, I've known there was something else, and it's not that it goes very far back. I believe that that memory that I have is actually basically right before I was incarnated in this form, and I was standing in a circle of beings of white light, like I was in the circle with them, and they didn't have faces or anything. It was just like, but I could sense there were these several beings standing around me, and the message I was getting, not through physical speech, but basically through telepathy or kind of spiritual communication, was that it was time for me to go. And I remember being like, oh, okay, like I knew that this was going to be hard, and there have been many difficult things for me in this life, but it was also important, and it was something that I needed to do. So I was born into an abusive situation. So there's definitely some tough things there, and then I think in our society we're still coming into kind of mainstream acceptance of psychic abilities, which mine are extremely strong. So that was tough for me. I grew up thinking it was crazy. It took many years for me to come to terms with that. So I think from the very beginning, I kind of felt like an alien because I just remember looking around and just feeling like other people aren't like me, and there wasn't really anything to do about it at that point. And for most of my life, up until about 10 years ago, I just pretty much kept it to myself. And then I had some experiences that I couldn't ignore, and I really had to open up and start taking classes. And thankfully, by that time, I think there had been more opening, and it was with the internet and different kind of spiritual circles and books and things. It was easier for me to find information than when I was growing up as a child. But yeah, that's been my process. But I've always been very sensitive, aware, and very telepathic. Ability to connect with, feel, and sense animals, plants, people, ghosts, angels, all kinds of different entities. And I'm clairvoyant as well as empathic. I'm telepathic, um, somewhat clairaudient. Like sometimes I literally hear, with my ears, and have various other things that come in from time to time. Psychometry, getting information through touch. Dreams that come true. So all kinds of different things happening with me, and this has been happening ever since I was young.
We're definitely going to touch on all of that as we move in, especially when we start chatting about the overlap between memory, dreams, this reality, the other side, and all that. Back in this foundational stuff, were you in? So as a kid, once you came in, and I have a lot to say about your experience beforehand because I have heard that from a couple other people. Sovereign Key, Lada Leon has also said that and brought some very interesting information. And then my personal experience, which everyone knows. So I love hearing that from another person. we are out there. Uh, what about pop culture stuff? Were there cartoons, movies, any of that kind of surface level stuff that you gravitated to when you're little or that sticks out?
You know what's funny is that I've always been into any kind of show that deals with the paranormal, like ever since I was little. And it's funny, even one of my favorite shows when I was a kid was Scooby Doo, where
Oh, yes,
they
yes.
still, some of it's like being debunked, but it's still like a part of it where you see, the man in the sheep costume or whatever. Like it was
Yes.
still a thing. Or also just magic. I also loved Bewitched, this
Oh,
idea of kind of magic and people being able to manipulate and influence the physical material world. So yeah, I've always been really drawn to that, and I think believed it on a level which most people probably don't because of the things that I witnessed and experienced, ever since a young age. And that love continues. Like I love television shows and films that deal with the paranormal slash supernatural magical as well.
yes. Yeah.
Dr.
As do
Bombay
I.
was my hero.
I love I loved Paul Lynde though too, Uncle Uncle. Oh geez, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. Oh,
I
geez,
can't think of
the
it
Paul
either.
Lynde character. I know, isn't that weird? I've mentioned him so many times. Yeah, Bewitch was iconic. But Scooby Doo doesn't
Yeah.
get enough play. Doesn't get enough. It
Yeah.
really and it Scooby Doo really brought in a lot of this stuff for a couple generations of people and
Yeah,
both
it
sides, so debunking, but also keeping us open to it.
it is, and it's still like a popular Halloween costume, and I think that says a lot that for literally decades, it's been a very popular thing, and there's a certain resonance and also this desire for people to understand and uh, figure out, what is being shown to me. Is this real, from a physical perspective, or is there something that we can't explain here?
Yes, that power of questioning, very big deal.
Yeah.
I just found out Uncle Arthur.
Yes. That's right.
Uncle
I couldn't remember the name, but yeah, I remember that too. It was so
He's
fun.
so crazy, I loved him. And, okay, so also back here in these kinda early formative days, did you have any of the typical fears, like fear of the woods or under the bed, in the closet, the dark, that kind of stuff?
I would say I was not a fearful child, but I think I'm basically very strong, and I had a lot of things that were and probably seemed very scary happening, but I managed to get through it. So I could be what's called a trance meeting, and where I could have spirits come in and communicate through me. I now understand that I'm basically set up that way. I prefer not to do that. I work more as like a mental medium where I relay whatever it is that I'm sensing and prefer to have my body for me. And no, thank you. Don't want anyone else coming in and having some time in this body. But that didn't stop various beings from trying. So not only was I seeing and sensing stuff that was pretty intense, but I literally had spirits like trying to get in my body, and so that would be a battle frequently. And for me, a lot of it was exhausting. And then before I understood how this worked, I frequently would have like at night where I would have what seemed like the worst reel of nightmare images from like horror movies, just like cycling through my third eye. It's like if I would see it, in my mind's eye. And now I realize there are different, spirits and beings that were trying to feed on that fear and just showing that to me on purpose. And so now, if anything like that comes up, I'm just like, oh, clear that, right away. Don't need to see that. But I just didn't even know how anything worked then. So that said, you know, I now am fairly fearless compared to a lot of people, especially with some of this stuff because I have experienced so much. And at the same time, as worse, as awful as some of this stuff was, I'm fine, and I was fine. Most of it's mental.
Yeah. What about, nature? Did you have a relationship with the natural world?
I've always loved nature. Um, Being in nature, but it's funny, I'm definitely an urban person, but I need to be around plants. So I like to be in cities, but near places where there are plants and gardens, and then I still have to get out. Like I can't be in a concrete jungle for a long time, but I feel very connected with nature spirits. Um, plants are very strong with me, and trees in particular. Like I've always loved trees, and as I got my training, I learned I could, communicate with certain trees, and I do feel like a lot of them have so much wisdom to share, and it's something that most people just dismiss. They don't understand that there is a consciousness with plants. It's one of my beefs with um, vegans that judge non-vegans. So I'm not judging vegans. I'm saying there's a type of vegan that is almost militant and uh, hateful towards people that eat meat. And I'm like, look, plants are alive too, guys. Not to freak everyone out,
Absolutely.
but
Yep.
to be alive is to eat life in many ways. And so I just think it's important for us not to judge.
Yeah, 100% with you on that. And it's a mindset. It's a getting to the connection factor that people seem to short out on. when
Right.
it comes to plants and trees. And trees really wow. And then there's the mycelium under the ground. I mean, we could talk all night on all this. It's amazing. What about okay,
That could
so
be our overlord, the
it
mycelium.
really could be this, there's it's a whole theory there. What about dreaming at a young age? How are you dreaming? So I know you were conscious when you came in, and you have a sense of where you come from. But how did it play out when you got into your little baby suit?
Yeah. So I think until I learned how to protect my dream space and my psychic spiritual space as a whole, a lot of my dreams were pretty intense and somewhat nightmarish. And not only that, but I was described as having night terrors because when I would wake, I would start to kind of wake up, and it's like I think when before you learn how to use your clairvoyance, your third eye, what would happen is I was starting to wake up and I was still seeing very strongly clairvoyantly until it kind of shut itself down. And so basically, I would see things in this sort of psychic spiritual realm, but in my physical space. So I would tell people, like, I might wake up in the middle of the night and be talking to people that aren't there, things like that. And it took me a long time to figure out what was really going on. And now I recognize, like, it's not that they weren't there completely, they're just not physical beings, a lot of what I was picking up on. And I had to learn how to access it, at will and not just in that kind of in between sleep and dream state. And also to have boundaries with what I allowed in. So a lot of these things are just showing up. And the analogy I give to people is our minds, our lives, and our energy fields are very much like a garden. If you don't plant flowers and weed, you're going to have a really weedy patch of land. And that's basically what's happening. I just anything was kind of coming in that wanted to come in. I hadn't set any parameters or boundaries or limitations, and a lot of the stuff that I would ultimately want to have in there wasn't in there because I hadn't nurtured it and um, created it in my energy field. And so now it's very different for me, and I still can have some kind of wonky dreams, particular from sometimes it'll happen where let's say I have a client coming up and I have like some weird dreams. I'm like, oh, that's totally connected with that client. Like my connection with that client is bringing in some of their kind of stuff that's happening with them, and I'm dreaming about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this is one of those tricky things for me when I have what I consider the big dreams that feel prophetic, where I'm um empathic as well, and I feel like I'm
Hmm.
filtering in a lot of what's going on collectively. Uh and so it's hard to know sometimes where the boundary is once in a while when it's big overtures energetically. So, okay, and then back here, let's just wrap up the young Laura. Within the dream idea, the idea of the dreamscape and the idea of dreaming as people perceive it separate from reality, we're so dealing with the night terrors early on and learning how to parse out the entities and all of that. Were you having states of lucidity and how high was your lucidity at this point going back?
I would say it was pretty low. I mean, it literally wasn't until I was an adult and started to get training that I was able to piece so much of this stuff together. I mean, I still did see and sense things that were there. But I would also have a lot of what I call now entity dreams, where they were dreams that were influenced by entities that were, I think of them as like energy parasites that were feeding on fear, stress, anxiety, chaos, whatever. I would, for example, see ghosts and spirits that were there and be lucid in that way. But in terms of connecting with light sources and kind of seeing some more true things, that wasn't until after I was 30 and got training. I think a lot of my angels and spirit guides that were showing up, and I just didn't even recognize their presence. And there was so much coming in that it was hard for me to kind of weed through all the sort of psychic spiritual noise to even hear their messages. So it's kind of like you have a bunch of, random people shouting at you, and then behind that there's someone quietly saying something in a calm voice, and it's like you can't really hear that calm voice. And there's all that other stuff in the way, and that's kind of where I was.
And then, so also just to kind of get the mechanics of the dream stuff out, how do you dream? How, okay, and if it's changed, so we'll just give this the scope of your life. But if it was specifically different and changed at one point, that is something I'm definitely
Yeah, it was for me. It
interested
was
in.
once I.
So,
Mhm,
you
oh,
know, the,
sorry. Mhm.
so just the landscape, like colors, taste, sound, black and white, since all that stuff.
Yeah, so it was when I really started to open up psychically, because for years I tried to block it out because I it didn't seem like a good thing to me at the time. But then fast forward many years, and I ended up in a bad place in my life. I was unemployed. I was in a bad marriage. I was physically ill, and I went to a psychic, and she explained how when I had blocked out my psychic abilities, I also blocked out my intuition, which made sense. So I set about the process of intending opening back up, taking classes, becoming more purposely aware of some of the stuff. And that was when I experienced a profound shift. So I used to have a lot of kind of nightmares and just dreams with a lot of weird, seemingly strange um, things coming up, symbolism, et cetera. And then I started to have really profound, meaningful spiritual dreams where I would wake up, and, a lot of those other dreams, like you would wake up and it just all would kind of like start to fade away and there was no connection. But after I made that shift of consciousness and opening up on purpose, I started to have dreams that were very meaningful and very memorable. I can still tell you like some of these dreams that I had many years ago, even that are so significant. And they were basically, I believe, like guidance dreams and really strong direct messages for me about my life and how to be. And and so yes, I have those kinds of dreams now where they're very meaningful and specific, and less of those kind of triggered kind of entity dreams. And what's funny, even though I can still have like a quote unquote bad dream, they're hilarious now because now it'll literally be like, oh my gosh, I don't have the right shoes to wear, something like you know, not something that probably anyone's gonna really freak out about. Whereas before I was having dreams that might be like literally babies being murdered or something truly horrifying. So it's definitely changed a lot. And I would say now when I tend to have dreams, I'm a lot more calm and the symbolism comes through in a very clear way.
Give us some examples of the dreams you were just hinting at.
Sure. So there are a couple of dreams that were very significant that I don't think I'll ever forget. So one of them happened as I was going through this shift, and one of the things I really struggled with was ghosts. It's the first types of beings I think really showed up to me. I, as a kid, sometimes struggled to tell who was a live person and was not, because sometimes they appeared very solid to me. In fact, I would think they were a live person until they did something that a live person would do, like, buzz through a door or disappear or whatever, appear to dematerialize. And so that was a big challenge for me. And there was a period of time when I was really struggling with what do you do? I mean, what do you do? All the things that are from the physical world don't work with ghosts because, they're not limited by physical barriers, et cetera. And I had this dream where I was swimming across a lake and it was night. And on the far side of the lake, you could see there was this light. Like, I don't know if it was the sun coming up or whatever. There was this light that was clear, the message, like, go towards the light. Swim towards the light. That's where you need to go. And in the water, I was on the surface of the water. And when I looked down, there were all these dead people that were underneath the water, and they were trying to grab me and pull me down into the darkness with them. And the message I got was, don't focus on them, because if you do, you'll get pulled down. And if you focus on the light and move towards the light, you'll be fine. And that's basically what happened in the dream. I just kept swinging towards the light, and I woke up before I got there, but it was just like, no, you're fine. Don't focus on that darkness and those spirits that are trying to pull you down. And that was a very meaningful dream for me, and that was basically the message of how I needed to operate. Like, yes, those things are there, have awareness of them, but don't get pulled in.
And how old would you say you were when that specific message was coming through?
Oh my gosh, that was after I was kind of psychically opened back up. I would think I was 31.
Oh,
It,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, I was well into
So,
adulthood. And then I had
it,
another dream that was a similar timeline, I think maybe just a little bit later than that. And um, the peacock has always been an animal that is really resonant for me. And I read a story that made me so frustrated because it was about how, you know, not everyone should try to be a peacock. I think it was some kind of folk story, and because peacocks can't fly, and like if they get attacked, then they're going to be in danger because of this. And in the dream, I was the peacock, and something tried to attack me. And instead of being bogged down like when I needed to, I just released my tail and just flew away. But I feel like it was symbolic. Like you can still have and be whatever you need to be, and just know that you always will have the tools to be safe.
oh, I love that symbolism. I love peacocks too. That's amazing. That's really, really, really good. And your perspective coming out of that also just is right on for me listening.
Thank you. Yeah, they were extremely profound for me at the time. And because I had still been operating a little bit more out of fear and limitation, and the message were just focus on the light, be who you are, you'll be safe no matter what. And I really feel that. And it was, a little bit before that I had this angelic visitation experience, which had really changed my perspective too, because I'd been connecting with kind of the darkness and dark beings that were around, and not known how to invite in and how to bring in some of these lighter energies. And once I did, I had an angelic visitation experience, which profoundly changed my perspective. And I knew at that point that I was going to be all right. And that's when I started to get these dreams, like I'm telling you about, and more specific messages from angels and guides, and asking them for help and guidance regularly. And I'm so passionate about angels because I feel like most people don't know about them as a resource, don't understand how to utilize them, and can literally help you go from a life that is about pain and struggle and challenge and difficulty to something that is magical and more easeful. We still have our lessons. It's never, all that stuff is never going to completely go away, but we don't have to be immersed in it like 24/7 like the way that I was.
So let's stop here and talk about angels for a second.
Sure.
And if you could give us some dream imagery of how you've been in contact and that kind of stuff would be excellent. What's your perception? So there's a lot. We all have a different perception. Of course, mine is these higher beings that are non-gendered. They're just a higher. They just don't even apply to our ideas of identity here, right? They're way above that. And in that there is this idea for me of uh mm, I can't even find words for them, Laura. Actually, they're just the energy is so intense. But they can be scary, and not intentionally, not trying to scare people, but they have a fierceness to them, and that reminds me a bit of like
Yeah.
the old Grecian gods and stuff, where they all have their specific qualities,
Mhm.
and they're accessible, but there is this barrier between us and them. And so I'm curious, where are you within all this? And again, if you want to share a couple of those dreams with them that are formative, I would love.
Yeah, so angels, I think, are incredibly powerful. And I found that there's a huge variety amongst angels. I mean, there's lots of different types of angels. And then there's, different angel personalities within those different types of the different orders of angels. And, the kinds of angels that, work with humans as a general rule are going to be different than some that work with different planes and different types of beings. And then even within, say, archangels, that there's a huge variety. So Archangel Michael, it's so interesting because he is to me the warrior, so stoic, so serious, the protector. it's such a different energy from, maybe someone's guardian angel who is very light and kind of more stereotypically what we think of as an angel as being very sweet and positive and nurturing and supportive. Like Michael's this, kind of, badass warrior with a sword. So I just think that's so interesting. The more I learned about different angels and interacted with them, the more fascinated I was by the different ways that they can manifest. What's interesting is that I actually haven't had a lot of dreams from angels once I opened up. I feel like I should say I think they give me dreams, and they are, even those two dreams that I mentioned to you, I think they basically helped form and present those dreams to me, but they don't show up in dream state to me as much. But I literally just open up and channel with them and communicate with them regularly. So that was a big part of my learning, was just being able to do that. I think a lot of people interact with angels whether or not they know it through angel light. So this was something that was happening since I was a kid, and I just didn't recognize it till I was an adult. This ability to, see them just in light form. So I now know that different angels show up as different colors. So Archangel Michael is like, usually blue. That's how he shows up for me. For some people, he'll show up as kind of fuchsia. For me, he's always blue. And so I know when he's there, when I just keep seeing that color. Yeah, I did have one interesting experience with Archangel Michael that was before I was even psychically opened up. That always really resonated with me. So my middle name is Michael, or excuse me, Michelle, which is the female version of Michael. And I had one experience when I was in college, and it's one of those things that really gave me pause at the time because I didn't understand it yet. But I was at the Isabella Gardner Stewart Museum in Boston, and this is a museum that was this, and a woman's home. She was a philanthropist, and when she died, she made her house a museum. And there's all these incredible artwork in there. And I was in this museum and looking across one of the floors, and like way across, I could see this giant painting. And it was the weirdest thing because I saw this painting and it was like, I know that guy, except it was a painting from the 15th century and it was an archangel and it was Michael.
Oh,
So that
wow.
that was one of those first moments where I kind of got that there was something with Michael. I still was psychically shut down and I didn't really get it, but I just knew that something was going on, and I feel like something in that painting really captured something in him. And yeah, it was so strong. It was this incredible recognition of this being, and it wasn't until many years later when I opened up and started channeling angels and understanding about this stuff that I understood its deeper significance for me, because I do believe that he is one of my main guides and is always there by my side.
I love that story with the painting. I've always been I didn't grow up with within any religion, and so none of that was in there. And I did forget to ask if you were brought up with a religion.
So I am not religious now. I consider myself spiritual, and there are certain things that are talked about in various religions that do line up for me, and many things that don't. So I don't subscribe to any particular religion. But my mom's family is Irish Catholic, and so I was raised with some of those beliefs. But at the same time, my mom was already, I would say, somewhat disenfranchised. So she didn't raise me in it as like this is, God's truth or something, but I was presented and it was shared from a cultural perspective because she grew up in a Catholic family. So I have always been kind of fascinated and interested about religion, but I think always felt like it's only part of the picture. So there are certain texts that I refer to, and I believe there's some resonance. A lot of the ones that I really do, I think are interesting because they're like apocryphal, for example, like they're not in accepted texts.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Gospel of Thomas and Mary. Yeah, there's some good stuff out there.
Yeah, there's many that the ones that we're talking about fallen angels and all kinds of like
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Nephilim
Enoch.
and
Mhm.
exactly, yes, yeah, the Hobbit. Uh,
Yes.
so I think there's something there, but I'm never gonna for any particular reason gonna be like, oh, all of this, yes, because I feel like they're created by humans and
Yep.
they're frequently an agenda and things got lost in translation and they were only from their own kind of perspective and filter as people anyway. So yeah, that's where
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, I feel like the gems are scattered everywhere. I see, Michael as blue too, and I think a lot of people
Mhm.
do. I, and I've always been super fascinated with the seraphim. And so, the six
Yes.
the fiery wings, holy, holy, and they're the scary ones, you know?
Yeah. No, there are some that are so powerful that they could
Yeah.
almost and this idea like that certain angels, you can't look at them because you would literally be blinded. Like our physical
Yes.
form can't even
Handle
handle
it.
it.
Yeah, it's like you turn to your eyes get blown out, the whole thing. Yeah, there's a lot of deep symbology there, and of course, as we know, there's where that is, there's a root of truth somewhere going on.
Absolutely. Yeah,
It's
and I love
fast.
some of these shows like Supernatural where I think they address
Yes,
that,
they
and I'm like,
totally
"Yes, I
do.
love it."
They have the best team of writers because they really do
Mhm.
pull in the juice and give it to
Yeah.
people in those spoonfuls of, what is the juiciness of Supernatural, the show. Uh,
Yeah, totally.
okay, so I wanted to also talk about this period of time that I keep circling. It's been mentioned several times. So it's really just post your Saturn return. So it's like right around 30,
Mhm.
31. Give us, take us into that period of your life. This is instrumental, clearly. I mean, obviously, it's a Saturnian period where things get shook up anyway.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you really took that and moved forward into your awakening and into who you are now, clearly. So, give us an idea of what was going on for you, and if you could root it into your dream world, if you could get the worlds together, your dayside life, and then also the dream sphere.
Sure. So, yeah, this all was happening for me where I had been kind of shutting out my abilities, trying to ignore them, ignoring not only that, but my body. I'm very sensitive, as many psychics are, in terms of what I put into my body. And I was basically, for my whole life, eating and consuming things that are just not aligned with my form at all. But I didn't understand that. I mean, I was just eating what typical Americans eat, and was in a lot of health problems as a result of that. So I reached this point where I was in a bad marriage that I didn't realize was even that bad till all of a sudden I really realized it was really bad. And then I'd had a contract position with University of Washington, which ended. So my master's is in political science. I had moved with my husband at the time from Colorado, where I mostly grew up, to Washington State. And this contract position that had ended right as the recession hit. And then right around then was when I realized that my marriage was super awful. And then I was physically sick. I was unemployed. So it was like every aspect of my life was in crisis. I was sick. I was unemployed. My marriage was falling apart. I was totally lost in terms of what do I do with my life, because of the recession, everything that I had been kind of leading towards was because like shut off, and I think it needed to happen. I also went through this spiritual awakening, and suddenly it was very interesting because suddenly politics had like no interest for me, which was so weird because that for me at the time everything had been leading up to that. Like I was heavily involved in politics. Not only did I work in government and politics, but I had been a delegate in the state assembly and convention. I was a planning commissioner for my town. I had been chair of my local public art committee. And like I was involved, at a very deep level. And I now know I have past lives that are associated with, government and politics. And for example, I wanted to be president when I was a little kid. Like, but as I had this psychic spiritual awakening and shift, I recognized how all that was not my path. It was such a strong thing. Like it was like instantly like a switch got flipped and I was like, nope, that's not it. And I was still trying to figure out what that was, but I suddenly realized I have to pay attention to the spiritual stuff. I also have to pay attention to my body because I had not been paying attention to my body. And I just basically been just kind of trying to rule over my body. Like my mind is going to force this on my body. Like I tried to be a vegetarian. I don't handle it well. I'm carb sensitive. Soy, allergic to soy, allergic to wheat, like everything that you would eat as a vegetarian, basically my body rejects. So I went through this kind of profound physical as well as spiritual shift at the same time, and just basically developed an awareness of what it is that both physically and spiritually is aligned with me and what isn't. And I had to acknowledge that for the first time. And through that same process, I also started to develop a much more positive relationship with my dreams. So that's when I was starting to have the dreams that I was telling you about versus these just very triggered, horrible, kind of nightmarish or just chaotic, dreams where anything was coming in that had really nothing to do with me and guidance. So, like, one of the dreams I mentioned, was this like nightmarish dream where it was right at the very end of my marriage and when all of these things were kind of coming to a head. And I literally had a dream where all these babies were being murdered in front of me and there was like nothing I could do. And it was just this feeling of being out of control. And no matter what I did, I couldn't help. And there was just pain and destruction all around me. And to go from that to the dreams that I told you about that are very much about, empowerment and hope and focusing on the light and not the darkness.
So in this period where the shift took place, what specific kinds of so obviously the new pathways opened up, and the pain and the struggle and all this stuff was starting to produce uh, the wonderful thing that creates the pearl, right? The bigger agitation, and it gives us the energetic force to move forward and create. So what's what things did you find as far as tools like training to get into where you are now with opening your third eye and further, because it was always there, but to
Right.
take it deeper and to walk into the agency that you hold now psychically?
So I took a ton of classes from local teachers, from, teachers that were, bigger kind of national or international teachers. I read so much about all this stuff, from angels to paranormal to learning about energy healing, all anything in this kind of realm was on the table. And there were days when I would read a book a day, like I was just like ravenously consuming information related on this topic. I also started to open up, ask for messages from my angels and spirit guides, pay attention to signs I was receiving from the message from the universe. So this was all happening all at once, and it became clear very quickly that I have a strong ability to channel and relay messages. So as I was taking these classes, and part of the practice was basically to do readings for people, and people in the classes are saying like, "Oh my gosh, Laura, you're right on. Like you're getting information so quickly and easily with very little training." And so that was a huge shift for me because I recognized that this was, I don't think this is an accident. I still had a lot of shifting to do in terms of releasing old attachments. Like I still had a really hard time letting go of the politics of government, even though I wasn't interested. It was like all I knew. So it was hard for me to accept the idea of being a professional psychic, even once I was very interested in this and passionate about it. It took I would say like 1 to 2 years for me to fully come into acceptance of like, wow, this is really part of what I'm here to do as a soul and to accept it and kind of take it on.
Oops, I muted myself. I was unmuted
Oh, that's okay.
earlier.
Hello?
I'm like,
I
where'd she
know.
go? Where'd she go?
Hello. So in this period, do you recall any significant? So you gave us the dreams earlier, but
Yeah.
moving forward a bit, when you started to actually take full agency and realize what your path had always uh because that's definitely what I hear here from the very beginning. This was always there. It was latent
Mm.
in you. You came with this. And it's clear because you keep answering questions I have. So I mean, you're right there in my head. It's awesome.
Oh,
And I
that's
don't get
awesome.
that
I
a
love
lot, Laura,
it.
really. And
I'm very telepathic.
yeah, and I'm an empath too, so it's really, and I've talked to a lot, and it's funny how some just don't seem to be there, but you, I can tell people Laura's 100% there. It's
Oh,
kind of
I love
spooky,
it. That's great.
uh, and so I'm definitely enjoying that. So in this post period, when you decided I'm this is it, I've really honed in on this. what kind of so when you accepted it and moved forward and got past kind of the you know how the outer world, there's those moments when you start making the stuff happen and there's still just those voices coming at you, like from people in the world saying, what are you
Yeah.
talking, you know, when you're switching life essentially, and
Yeah.
the so what was going on in your dream world at that particular time? So,
I think I was kind of vacillating from still some of these kind of triggered kind of entity dreams to dreams that were guidance dreams and more calm. So was, transitioning from one to more of the other. And I also had an amping up of what would be maybe not called dreams, but visions or um, that time that in between sleep and dream state being extremely significant and powerful for me, where I would have significant realizations, awarenesses of different beings that were there, sometimes light beings, sometimes dark beings. So that's when I had one of these, this angelic visitation experience that was so profound for me. And that was really right at the beginning of this acceptance of this journey. And I just was surrounded by, the feeling and sounds of angels. And there was like this humming sound, and I could hear their wing beats actually. And just a feeling of security and love, and that no matter what happened, I was going to be safe. So that really started this whole journey for me. And a lot of what started to happen was not as much in the dream state, but actually in conscious awareness, becoming aware of things that I think had always been there, but I was seeing them through a different lens. So, for example, I'm very telepathic, receiving information through my thoughts, and I had assumed, I think like most people do, that my thoughts were my own, and now I'm like, that's ridiculous. For most people, our thoughts are so much a combination of all these different things coming in. But whereas before I had just been like, well, yep, that's terrible or whatever. I guess it's mine. I started to question it, and I had some very specific experiences where I suddenly realized, like, wow, that is like someone talking, and I don't have to accept that, and I certainly don't have to internalize it. I remember walking down the street, and I heard this what sounded like my thoughts, but in my head, and it was someone who was cursing, and just the tone was really not something that I felt like was mine when I questioned it. But when I was young, I just took it all on. And I grew up, for example, thinking that I was very ugly and having a very negative self concept, even though this wasn't a situation where, people physically in my life were telling me that I was. It just, I think I heard it psychically so much because there were beings that were trying to make me feel badly about myself that when I got to the point where as an adolescent where you start to get hit on by, other boys or men or whatever. And I literally thought it was a joke, like hit on the ugly girl, to be mean or whatever, because I had gotten so many negative messages through thoughts. And so it took me a long time to unpack that and figure that out. So for me, there were things that were coming in through dreams, but I think the biggest shift for me was during the waking state and realizing how much comes in through our thoughts and feelings that isn't ours. And we can either take stuff in from entities and ghosts and things like that, or we can choose to get thoughts and feelings from later beings. And we just need to learn how to choose, and that's what was happening. Is I was starting to learn how to do that.
yeah, this is a big deal with the voices and hearing and what we take on, and especially as we see the suicide rate just skyrocketing.
Yes,
That is
absolutely.
part of it, and it's people are not understanding those voices are not their own. These
Yes,
are external, and part of the, pardon my language, fuckery of the outer world, though, is telling you that you're crazy if you wanna say these are not your voices. This is, the feedback we get is terrible as a
I agree.
society.
Completely. Like, I literally thought I was crazy growing up, and I just was like, I just can't talk about this because I didn't want to be labeled as crazy. I didn't want to be put in an asylum. I just didn't want to deal with it. So I just kept it all to myself. And it wasn't until a family friend described a ghost that I'd seen but never told anyone about I got confirmation that it wasn't in my head. But I agree, this whole issue of mental health and suicide,
Mhm.
depression, also not just on that level, but people that do these mass shootings or attacks, some terrorist activity. That's also what's happening, is that they're being
Yes.
influenced by some of these beings. And I had done a reading with a client that was so fascinating, but it made so much clear afterwards. This was in Colorado. We've had a series of problems with kind of strings of suicides. I think this happens in other places too, but I just heard about it since I was in Colorado, where, someone would commit suicide and then someone related to them would commit suicide and someone connected to them would commit. And what I saw was this kind of entity hopping, where these beings, these kind of entity, again, I think of them as spiritual or energetic parasites, would really kind of attack and focus on one person who's vulnerable, get them to kill themselves, and the people around them are now going to be vulnerable because they've just lost someone they loved and they're sad, and then they would hop over to whoever was the next kind of most vulnerable person and attack that person. And that's what would happen. Like, these beings would literally kind of jump from person to person, and as someone succumbed, they would find the next kind of weakest target near them. And so, yeah, I really would love for there to be more openness and understanding of this in terms of mental health from mainstream society. I think there are people that are working on helping this to happen, but it's still a pretty kind of side, kind of like weird idea for most people.
Well, it's not materialistic. You can't quantify it. It's not repeatable. I
Yeah,
mean, there's a ton of reasons why. Plus,
yeah,
Freud pretty much destroyed any possibility of outside influences from the spiritual realm, on your psyche.
Whereas
yeah,
Freud may have destroyed him, but Jung brought it in. He
Oh,
brought that into the
yeah,
conversation.
I think it existed long before Jung as just like
Oh, of course it
common
did.
knowledge, and
sure.
he brought it to the public. So yeah,
Yeah.
but
He kind
Freud
of
destroyed.
classified it and
Mhm.
gave it context in a way that I think it resonated for people.
I find it curious that those entities don't split or invite their friends to, hey, look what I found, a crowd. Like they could hang out with an Antifa group, and just go nuts. But
Well, sometimes that happens too. Certainly, the things with violence or aggression towards groups or a particular type of people, but I do think I really see them with either these kind of aggressive
mhm.
kind of terrorist acts, and then with people that are depressed and suicidal.
Yeah, it's definitely I always see it as kind of like a chain. And that you mentioned earlier, where once one starts, then that whole group of
Yeah,
people gets infected with
right,
the mourning, the sorrowful, the missing, all this, and then it's low hanging fruit.
right. Yeah, it's easier for them because that person is already emotionally vulnerable and maybe feeling alone and somewhat
Hmm.
abandoned. So it's interesting for me to look back on this now, knowing what I know as a psychic, because I actually struggled with depression and was a period of time when I thought a lot about suicide. And I'm just, I'm very thankful that I, didn't go down that path. But I now realize that so much of that was just being planted in me. And for those of us who are here to do this kind of deep spiritual work, that it's much easier to try to, bring down the light bearers, or, than the whole effort. And so those of us who are teachers, healers, there have often been pretty big efforts to snuff us out. And I think people that end up committing suicide, sometimes that's the case where they get, I would say, more kind of attacks or negative attention than maybe an average person.
Absolutely. And this is, sadly it's common. I think most people these days have gone through this, for lack of a better word, this kind of suicide virus.
Yeah,
The deeper into this reality timeline we're on, I certainly did too as well, and it was definitely part of my initiation into, wow, these are actually not my thoughts.
yeah,
This is external, and happening internally, right? It's an internal feeling, but when you realize you're being fed upon and these thoughts are not actually your own, that's
yeah.
a light bulb moment. And I've never been depressed since, once I cracked that code. So and that, you know, that's a long time
Yeah.
ago, it's teenage years. So I want
Yeah.
to I want to talk a little bit about some ideas around OBEs and extreme lucidity, so waking up within the dream, and give us your experience within this kind of stuff.
Sure. So I've definitely had out of body experiences and been able to astral travel, project myself outside of my form, certainly in dream state, and then also, the ability to do controlled remote viewing and things like that. So whether it's your actual form going to that place or just you're able to put your consciousness there, I mean, I absolutely have gotten so many confirmations that's possible. I had experiences myself, taught classes where people are doing this. So I think this is absolutely a thing, and I think it's not even just about this dimension, because I think when most people think of, let's say, for example, astral travel, they tend to think of like in this dimension, and I think it's really complex when you get, um, you know, different dimensions and this multi-dimensionality aspect. And I think it's also possible to, through that similar method, to go into other dimensions and explore those. And that's something that I think most people aren't really thinking about. And when there's beings that we don't understand or we think of as alien or foreign, people are assuming that some of these are extraterrestrial, when a lot of times I think they're extra dimensional. And some of them are more physical than others. But it is possible for us, some of us, to go into some of these other dimensions, and it's possible for some of them to come into our dimension as well. And so that's where it gets really fascinating.
Do you think that the state of dreaming is it a portal? Do you can
I,
you see
I
it that way?
I can. It's an opening to the spiritual realm. And sometimes, I mean, I think many people who are open, psychically spiritual, have had dreams where I'm like, wow, that was not just a dream. Like I was in someplace else. Either experiencing something that's going on with someone else, or maybe that's another aspect, another incarnation that I'm in, and wake up and it's like it just felt so real. So absolutely, I definitely think that dreams can be portals, not always, but they
Yeah.
certainly can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. Jerry?
Yeah, I was going to say the idea of you said incarnations, and I have the same exact thing, that your people, quote unquote, past lives are all running simultaneous. It's all right now, happening
Yeah.
now, and it's infinite. But your consciousness can only exist in one of them, so you got to pick one. And when you
Yes.
sleep, you can maybe
Yeah.
jump to another one, and that's technically a past life, or I don't know what you want to call it, adjacent life.
Yeah, and I think as you get more experience as a soul, more awareness, you can develop an understanding and have access to some of this stuff. I think that younger souls that are having that conscious experience at a younger level, where they haven't had as much experience from their ability to remember it, they're not able to access that. So it's just an interesting thing where I feel like most people are coming at this from their level of consciousness and awareness, and then expecting everyone else to be at that same
Right,
level.
right, because they just found
It's
out.
like,
Oh my God.
yeah, yeah, and that was a big light bulb moment for me, like, "Oh, I really can't expect other people to believe and understand some of the things that I believe and understand, because they haven't had that experience to lead them there yet."
And one thing that's real interesting about, if that's the case, that you're basically, it's a roulette wheel and you're the ball, and you
Right.
know that it kind of uh, destroys the theory that your mind is wiped when you're born here. It's not.
So,
It's not wiped. You just started a new file.
I think we have a sort of selective amnesia that happens as needed, and that when we're able to handle that information, it gets less and less. So for me, I'll have flashes of past lives all the time, and there are certain things even coming in I already knew were really significant. Always was really drawn to ancient Egypt and understood that there was significance for me there. And by the way, like
Were you
when you
Cleopatra?
I had significant past lives during ancient Egypt. And when something is important for you, the universe will find a way. So my undergrad's in theater, and I went on a business trip to Cairo in theater, which is totally bonkers. Like that is not a normal thing. So here was, I just graduated from university, and I was sent to Cairo to work on a theatrical production. Like that's weird,
Yes.
very cool. I'm so glad that I went. But yeah,
It's the
it
way
was
synchronicity
pretty
works. Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, exactly.
All right, I'm
Yeah,
done.
that's a really great example with the Cairo stuff. I love I just want to ruminate on uh Jerry's idea with the roulette wheel near the ball. I just think that is such a perfect image for how some of this can function. And it resonates with me. I hadn't seen it that way, so I just wanted to give that a little bit of love. When so when we're talking about OBEs and being out of body, I want to look at higher consciousness here. So what do you see the difference? What is the difference from your opinion and your experience between say that state and the state we're in right?
So I think when you're out of body, you're really focusing on just the spiritual component of yourself. And when you're in body, you're focusing on the combination of your physical experience and your energetic or spiritual body. And I think the spiritual is very important. And I think this physical also has its place. So I think it's in many ways about balance, and we can be the most effective when we are crossing that bridge between the two and being aware of the spiritual, but also being attached to and in our physical bodies. That's what I have found. So I think I spent the first part of my life being completely only focused on the physical and having very little understanding and awareness on a deeper level of the spiritual. And then I think because I had gone so far in that extreme, then when became aware of the spiritual, and I just dove deep into that and went in very quickly and very deeply, far in that direction. And then what I've come to realize is the most impactful and powerful place to be is actually by bridging that gap and being in the middle. So yes, understanding that the spiritual realm is very important, and we have to have awareness of that, but we also have to balance that with an understanding of the material world, and being kind of walking that line. And I feel like that's part of what I'm here to do, is help people with that. So as an example, my birthday is May 20th, so I'm a Taurus cusp Gemini. So I'm bridging between earth and air. And I think that is important. And it's good to play around with the spiritual. It's good to be here physically. And then the most powerful is to understand how the two meet.
Absolutely. It's uh, it's yeah, it's rather juicy, especially when you open yourself up to how they overlap.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times we're taught you kind of have to choose one or the other. Like, no, this doesn't have to be a choice. Like, and there's so much power, and I mean that in terms of spiritual power, when you acknowledge their connection.
Is there Okay, so speaking in the physical material world, how real, Laura, do you think this is? I mean, of course, it comes off very real, and if we cut ourselves, we bleed, and just like in video games too, we can die. But how real is it in when we look at it and compare it to things like memory, how that's just so transient, and then other states of consciousness like dreaming and channeling and all of that, it's for me, the lines really start to fade if I allow myself to go there.
Yeah, I mean, in many senses, it's not very real on the way that most people think of it as being real, but at the same time, it is a huge learning place. And, it's not an accident that we're here. And if we're here, it's because there's something for us to understand and experience and explore. So I think it's important not to get caught up in certain illusory perspectives or beliefs, but at the same time, to know that it is here for a reason, even if it is for us to transcend it. But that's still a thing, and we, in order to do that, often need to go through certain experiences in order to be able to understand exactly how it works.
In in the dreamscape, do you get precognitive stuff that you come out knowing this is a precognitive experience where you've actually, for lack of a better word, and simplistically, you've seen ahead?
Yeah, although what's interesting is as I develop my abilities, it happens less, and I think it's because I'm able to access that through just my awake state now. I don't. It doesn't have to come in through a dream. So I think when I was not as open and didn't have as much training, dreams are one of the main sort of avenues that my angels and spirit guides could use to give me information. And now I can just channel it, and I just do it so regularly, either for myself or for clients. So that's been an interesting shift to watch where it's like, wow, I don't need it through dreams as much. And so it's not coming in through that channel because I didn't know how to bring it in through other channels before. The dreams were like a channel that was easy for them to access. And so I think that happens a lot with people who haven't learned to open up in other ways, that the angels and guides and maybe loved ones are like, oh my gosh, well, we can get to her through dreams. So we're gonna do that. And that's wonderful. I mean, I think that's amazing. But I also think it's not the only way to receive that information. So that's been an interesting thing to watch shift for myself, because when I was going through this big shift, I was getting more of these profound dreams, and now I just basically get the information that comes in. And in terms of precognitive or kind of prophetic dreams, certainly did have several of those involving, things that would happen for me or people in my life, clients. But now I just open up psychically and I just see things that are coming or potential things that are coming. And a lot of times we have choice and we can choose yes or no down this path or this other path. But I don't have to access it through a dream state anymore.
I've heard this from other people before, and I've decided to consider it tuning. You were tuning into your own higher frequency, and it had to be done
Yeah.
through symbology and through your subconscious and dreaming until you were, you got onto that channel, and now, boom, you're
Yeah.
clicked in now. Yeah.
I think that's a really, really good point, and that happened also even just, as a psychic through my work, meaning when I first was starting, I really needed the symbols and the messages, and I'd have to decode it, and now it's like, I just get the message, so I'm a really fast reader now compared to what I was because I used to need to see the symbol, try to decode it, ask for clarification to make sure I wasn't understanding. And then for a while, the images would show, and then it was like, okay, I decoded that, I know what it means. I don't need to go through that whole process of like decoding it. But now I just get the message directly. It's like I don't even need symbols anymore. And it was a really profound shift, and also meant that I just became a much faster reader. So like now I can get in 15 minutes what it literally might have taken like an hour and a half for me to get before,
Right.
just in
And
terms of the amount of information.
for listeners, when she says reader, she means reading people psychically, not reading books.
Yes, yes. It's important to clarify. Although I am a very fast reader in terms of books as well.
That's good.
When you give us an idea, and so with the idea of filters of how you present, say in particular, like this last weekend, I was presented with information that I needed to get through that was difficult to tell someone, and found the filters and got it through. But how do you deal with difficult information where you can see someone is, say for example, close to passing and they have no idea?
Mm,
You can see that that's coming down the pipe, um, or anything difficult. How has your filtering of information grown over the years, and where are you at now with, say, this harder stuff?
yeah. So first thing, I always check in with why is that person coming to me, and I do my best to serve them with what their needs are and check in with my guides. Is this something that's going to be beneficial for this person to know or be aware of or not? Um, I think when I first started, I just felt like, oh my gosh, it's going to help them. And I just would share whatever I felt like was important for them to know. And I've realized over the years that that's not always actually the most helpful, because sometimes that was my projection of whatever I thought they needed, not what they actually did. So I really lean on the angels and spirit guides to help me determine what is going to be the most important for them now. And I also don't get wrapped up in their choices the way that I used to. So it used to be, if I provided some information and then that client chose not to act on that or not to believe it or whatever, and then they experience pain or suffering or even death, as you brought up, can happen. And I used to really take it personally. Now I'm like, no, they just, that's whatever a person chooses is what they need. And I think that was hard for me to accept. But I've realized that if people are choosing something, it means there's still something in that in terms of a lesson or experience that they haven't gotten yet. So that's helped me a lot with letting go of, feeling like I have to change outcomes to a certain thing, or that it's important for me to relay something that maybe that person doesn't even want to hear. And part of it was also me making sure that I'm only doing this with people that are really ready. So, for example, charging as a psychic is really important for that reason, because it's one of the ways that you prevent yourself from trying to give information to people that they do not want or are not ready for, is that financial barrier. And it's a significant one. I mean, it's in other societies it wasn't through money directly, but that's how our society is set up. So that's part of it. And then in terms of when I am getting the message to release something that could be painful, traumatic, or challenging for the person, I try to do it with compassion, and also relay whatever it is I'm getting in terms of, is this set yet, or are they being told this so that maybe there's an opportunity for them to make a change, even a dramatic one, to change this outcome, which sometimes happens as well.
Have you, after say a reading has ended and it is whatever it was, gotten more information about a situation? I know you've done investigations with agencies and stuff. Say you've gotten more information. Do you how do you then reopen, like recontact the client and say more has come in? How do you go about that if you get more information
Mm.
that you didn't have during the initial reading?
It doesn't happen very often, and I guess it depends on what the situation is, with the terms of that particular situation, client. It doesn't happen much. I had one reading where it was so funny, because in the moment I was like, I just was certain people are harder to read than others. I don't know if you have that experience, but like sometimes information comes through, sometimes it just feels like it's coming through murky water or something. And I think sometimes that has to do with also the openness of that person to receive that information. But at this one client where she asked me about her partner, and I was like, and I was getting this her romantic partner, like, this is not your best partner for you, but you guys are both learning lessons, through each other. But when you're ready to move through this lesson, like, you can move on. You don't need to be in this anymore. And she'd asked me how long she was with that person, and I think she meant in this life, like how long. I think she was kind of testing me, and what I got was 7, and it wasn't until later that I was like, "Oh, that was 7 lifetimes." So it was one of those moments
Oh,
where it's like,
wow.
"Oh, she was asking about years, but they told me lifetimes," and it's because 'cause they've been playing this game, kind of dance together for so long, and at that point, I'm like, "I'm not gonna reach out to her." Like, I think she's doing what she's gonna do. But at any rate, that was one of those examples, but that's rare. It doesn't happen very often, and I think it was more for me to understand the awareness of, like, what happened there
Yeah, that
in
is
the reading.
interesting. What about, so how do you feel, what are your perceptions and ideas of, and Jerry brought this up a little bit earlier about death, but in the idea of death, and since you have uh a, well, who you are and the work you do, but also the way you came into this particular life, having already been aware, what are your How do you feel about death? What's going on with the process of death? And once you get there, are there things, what kind of wisdom can you share within the kind of the general death talk of all this?
Yeah, it's so funny because as a psychic and what works as a psychic medium, I think of death so differently than most people. I welcome death when it's my time. Like I'm not in a hurry because I know that I have a lot of things I can do, and I'm like happy to do them. But to me, death really is just another type of birth. So I think we get born into here, and then we also get born into the other side and the spiritual realm without the physical. And I welcome it when it's the time, and I think it's a magical, wonderful place. And uh, there are some cultures that I think acknowledge that, and you hear like death doulas, which is the same as like there's doulas for birthing babies, and so that's how I really feel about it. That we're just going into the birthing of another level of awareness and understanding for ourselves, and that's one of my big hopes is to help to shift and release fear about it because I just feel like it's not something that is fear worthy. And most of the stuff that elicits fear around death has to do with a lot of false ideas and messages we've gotten about the process and hell. I can't tell you the number of ghosts that I've crossed that were literally afraid of burning in hell. And I'm like, look, this isn't what's happening for you. You can cross over. Don't worry. It's these mental ideas that we get pulled into that bring a lot of fear. And I have found from my work communicating with spirits that it's a really lovely process. And once spirits go through that process of the life review and kind of understanding what happens, there's so much appreciation for the time on the other side and also the time here because then they can see the whole perspective.
I have it on good authority that the hell dimension has been shut down for a couple hundred years.
I think there are different planes that people might think of as somewhat hellish, but it's not a place that is like, oh, well, that's where you go to be punished for your sins or something like that. It's not like that at all. And also, when spirits are earthbound and kind of trapped, I feel like that could feel, pretty hellish. But I've also gotten the message that when people are on a soul level ready to get out of that, then they will. And so it's just a very different thing than what we've been kind of shared through Judeo-Christian perspective of it being a place for punishment.
Have you seen this new TV show? Sorry to tangent here,
No,
but
that's fine.
it's called The In-Between.
I've heard of it, but I actually haven't watched it yet.
Okay, it's about this young woman who's a psychic medium and can communicate with entities that are in the space that they call the in-between, which is
Mhm.
astral space. They don't specify. It's between the next life and hell, or heaven and hell.
Mhm.
They don't come out and say heaven and hell, but it's pretty much implied. It's just the space that shit happens in. And it's interesting. You might enjoy it. I don't know. I like
Yeah, I mean, I did, like I said, I do like shows that deal with paranormal and kind of supernatural. So I will check it
I
out.
think it's on CBS.
I need to check that out as well. I'm wondering, so I just had recently, someone quite close to me had uh, died and came back. And he said that, and this, who knows what I do and all this stuff and my perspectives. We don't die, of course. And, I mean, we're immortal. It's so funny. But his experience was really interesting where he said it was just on off when all signs of life were there. He just turned off. It was white and then just turned off and then he was back here and nothing happened in the in between. And and I've heard these stories before also, but I'm wondering what are your, and it's perplexing. I don't have anything to say to that. I don't even know what to say to that because that was his experience. And I don't even know. So again, another thing that's synchronistic about you being on right now, because I wanted to bring that to you. What are your thoughts on that with people that just have this kind of nothingness experience, that have had a near death experience, that have died and come back?
I think that perhaps they didn't fully disconnect from their physical form in the sense of even though the body may have been dead, they haven't truly that door hasn't opened, that doorway to the spiritual plane, perhaps because it wasn't meant to be for them as an experience or just wasn't their time. I think that's part of it. And I'm also getting that for some people that have that, they have almost like a block on their third eye or something that is allowing them to see. So it's almost like someone put a blindfold and they just can't even see. So I think it depends, but those are two options that are kind of popping up psychically for what's going on with some of those individuals.
Yeah, and the first one I think is where I've landed with it. I think that it wasn't because he wasn't gone, right? It was like pretty fast. But
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
signs of life were all gone, but then and he did come back pretty fast. So I thought it wasn't long enough of a disengagement from the body. And who knows what's from there. Is so with that though, with these experiences, also, I guess the people that have died longer have been dead clinically long, where they put the paddles away and all that, and they come back.
Right. Yeah.
Those stories are amazing.
Mm.
Those are almost always amazing. And I can't recall the book that those doctors, that one with all the doc just came out a couple years ago with these tales that doctors didn't want, some were remained anonymous, didn't want to talk about in public because they were still in practice, but just filled with these amazing stories of death and people that came back after impossible amounts of time.
Right.
uh, okay, so yeah, I got sidetracked into that, but I wanted to bring that in because that just happened this last weekend. Uh, so oh, it's weird how my mind just flew away with that.
Can I bring something up that's coming up to share? I'm
Yes.
getting from the guys
Come
share.
in,
So,
Laura. Come in with
okay,
it.
all right. So, one of the things my guides are wanting to talk about is how there's not only different levels of soul development that are happening here. So, kind of young souls and older. It's not quite the right term, but those that have more experience and those that don't. But we also have different types of souls that are incarnating, and the perspectives from those different types of souls are going to vary widely. So, I am an incarnated angel, and that means that I connect more with angelic realms than perhaps some others because they're like they're my type, right? My people in a way. And also that I am very psychic. I have certain avenues that are more open to me than for some others because of this kind of soul nature than other people. So I just get that that's important to bring up because it's not like we're all the same in terms of what we even can perceive or understand because of both the level of experience that different people that are incarnated have, as well as maybe our inherent original form as well.
Thank you. I actually needed to hear that. So I needed to hear
Good.
that.
Okay. It was like something I don't talk about this a lot during the piece, but it just came in to share it.
No, it's very meaningful to me personally. I wanted to, and I had this written down for this particular point in the show before we start, seeing if people have questions for you and all that that may be in the
Sure.
chat. I don't pay attention. I like to focus on the conversation.
Sure.
But do you have, looking forward into this timeline, and now we know that these timelines shift and all that. What do
Yeah.
you see going on? So I'm looking at, of course, above politics, all that. I'm looking at the major changes we're seeing in the world, in the earth, and in the energetics that seem to be flooding in, and this weird shift over that
The age of
is happening.
Aquarius.
Right, the age of Aquarius, but the way that the planet seems to be
Shifting.
having its shifts as well. And then there's a lot of talk about the event and all that stuff. What do you think's going on, and what have you seen personally that's attached to all this?
Yeah, I think we're going through a profound physical shift and a lot of behaviors that are not aligned with the planet are going to start to be released. I think we're in the sort of last gasp of some of these old paradigms that are holding on. So even though things may appear to be worse or getting worse, I actually get that we're about to go through some major, very positive shifts in terms of the planet, but it's just that kind of last gasp of these horrible things that we're experiencing right now, some of them. And I do get from the spiritual realm that we're going to have some pretty kind of miraculous things that come in and solve some problems that a lot of people think are unsolvable. So I do have hope and faith in that. So whether it's radiation or plastic or whatever, um, not to get into a lot of fear. Yes, do take it seriously and take action, but at the same time, know that it's possible for there to be a huge kind of paradigm shift that changes things very quickly and very dramatically.
Is it like a cataclysm kind of shift or
I mean, it could be something
scientific
spiritual, but I'm
discovery?
talking about, yeah, scientific
Mm.
discovery, awareness, someone coming forward with, some solution. So there's so many things right now where there have been forces trying to keep kind of in the dark, so to speak. So kind of unlimited power that we need, where we don't have to burn fossil fuels and things like that. That I think there's so many souls and spirits that are incarnated trying to help us with some of these seemingly insurmountable problems.
Do you think that the system it is trying to dampen consciousness as a whole
Absolutely.
with like
Oh yeah.
things like 5G? I was going to say.
Oh yeah. I mean, things like um 5G, things like keeping people sick and kind of dumb. I would be very cautious about having fluoride. I'm very careful about the water that I drink. That's one of those things that I do feel like that is actually a purposeful attempt to keep people um, both under control as well as reduce intelligence in order to keep people more malleable and controllable.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I think there's a
Operation Paperclip.
yeah, there's a lot of these things at work, but at the same time, there's also a lot of souls that are working on trying to help this information come out. And I think it's important to, if you are one of those souls, to do it in a way that is safe for you, and that's the key. It's easy to kind of rail against some of these forces, but sometimes then you get silence. So you have to find a way to balance whatever it is that you're trying to share um, with finding a way to do it safely. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because I feel that's one of the reasons I've gotten the message to go more into kind of entertainment.
Yeah.
And I do a fair amount in that world because people, it's like feels safer for them to access it, and it's safer for the person presenting it to be doing it through that lens
Mhm.
sometimes than to be, okay, it's a fictional story about aliens and control things, or it's a
Yeah,
fictional
we
story
encapsulate it
about
in dream
whatever.
talk. It's
Yeah,
you know
yeah, exactly. People can kind of accept it, and it doesn't feel as dangerous to society
because every
when those in
fiction
power.
has a little truth to it somewhere.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mm.
Well, that said too, what are your perceptions on other races, non-human,
Oh
and
man,
the whole
yeah.
galactic thing? Where are you there?
Well, yeah, I'll just say there's a whole lot going on there.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So way more people think. I think there's a general consensus, even amongst the scientific community, that there probably is extraterrestrial life somewhere. And my perspective as a psychic is like, there is no question about that. It
Yeah.
is here on this planet, many different forms. And as a psychic, I can say that there are many, many different types of beings that appear human and are not. Um, so, yeah, that's just my perspective. I don't expect everyone else to understand or believe that, but that is what I see and perceive with my ability. And some of these beings are, I would say, helpful, and some are not. It's quite the range. Same thing with humanity. Like we have Hitlers and we have Mother Teresa's and
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
in between.
Yeah, it's funny for me. I'm with you 100% on this. And the thing that I'm noticing recently is I'm seeing them more in the open now, the more humanoid ones. Are you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. For some time now. And what's funny is a lot of them are very telepathic. And so it's like you can have these, kind of telepathic conversations. A lot of times they'll do things that are just very out of the norm for human
Yes.
behavior. So if you're
Yes.
really watching for it, you could be like, okay, yeah, that's not a normal thing a human would do.
No, they're shining. They're like they stick out. So it's so funny because what they're doing is they're basically blending. So they're in normal clothing
Yeah. Oh,
and
they
all
look,
this.
appear human. Yeah,
Yes. So, well,
exactly.
some of them do. Some are quite awkward looking.
That's
And
true. I mean, if you're paying attention,
yeah,
yeah, I totally knew. I saw one where I was like, don't even like you
it's
fit in,
not
but you don't
passing.
even really look like you.
Yeah, it's like, girl, you're not passing. And that's what, yeah, I mean, I've been having these encounters. And it's funny
Yeah,
when I'm with people, and I'm an introvert and I live kind of I say monastic lifestyle. And I mean that more in the kind of witchier sense because I'm not a, I wasn't born with any kind of religion. So, but
right.
I try to stay out of the public really. And when I'm out in the public, it's usually with friends, and I'll point these things out, and it's like they blend until you point it out. And then, I get the agreement. I'm like, is this is this is non-human. And they'll
Yeah.
get their eye on it and they realize this is truly non-human. And so what do you think's going on? It's all, Laura, it's been in the last really for me 2 years. I'm just seeing them every time I'm out in the world now, someone somewhere. And usually they're in pairs, I notice.
Yeah, I have seen that as well. Not always. There will be some just one, but I find them a lot in pairs as well.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So do you think that we're on the edge of some sort of what I mean, I've heard so many things from different people. Some people have brought up, well, they're it's like coming to the zoo planet, our planet, and they get in and they just want to see what walk amongst the locals, the indigenous, the people here, and I mean, there's just so many theories. What do you think's going on with the fact that there are so many really walking amongst us now?
Well, I think what you said is probably part of it, and I think there's also this major battle kind of struggle for control of this planet, and it's really amping up. I mean, this is happening in the human level as well, right? With
Yes,
different
yes,
countries and perspectives and cultures that are trying to have dominance. But it's also happening with different beings, some of which are extraterrestrial and some of which are extra dimensional. So it's
yes,
it's really complicated because sometimes people think something's extraterrestrial, and it's like, well, actually, it's from this Terra, but from a different dimension of this Terra. So it gets really confusing. But yeah, I think we're ramping up, and I think there's many, many different beings that are behind even some of various government or
yeah,
political
yes,
systems, corporations, and I feel that there is, even though a lot of these most of these beings do want to be kept secret, there's also major efforts to plant the idea to people that they exist. So this is what I was talking about with entertainment, like movies like Men in Black, or these
yes.
different things, like being like, hey guys, hey, there's a bunch of stuff here that you don't know, and by the way, it's like really happening. Oh, and they can clear your memories and blah blah blah. And I'm like, yep. And I love that when I think it's Tony Jones, but he picks up the tabloid and he's like, I got to see what's really happening, and he like opens up the book and
Right,
it's
right,
these
right.
crazy sounding stories, and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of funny because a lot of the what we consider like the weird online sites or stuff, I'm like, yep, that's totally happening.
It's
Yeah,
been thoroughly seeded into the entertainment. I mean, everything. Look at all
yeah,
the series is now, and they're really
yeah,
pushing now the interdimensionality, like with Stranger Things and
yeah.
all that.
Stranger Things, the new Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse,
Mhm.
like,
Yes.
yeah, it's really coming up, and I'm so glad because mainstream, this is the first time this has happened where it's becoming something that is discussed by, a lot of people.
I hate bringing up media all the time, but did you see that show Travelers on Netflix?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I did.
I think that was an important concept to get out with
Yeah,
Travelers.
both the way it
I need to
ended
check
and
that out.
both the idea of consciousness transfer through time and the fact that they were being ruled by an AI.
I think that's really significant. And then the
Mhm.
other thing that I'm seeing a lot of is shows involving what we would, or some people might call, monsters being humanized.
Yes.
So one of my favorite is like Hotel Transylvania, where they're like, "Look, we're nice monsters. We can have children with humans. We're not evil."
If you watch any of the shows on the CW, the DC ones like
Uh-huh.
Flash or Arrow or
Yeah,
whatever, I can't think of any other ones right now, but they all have this concept of metahumans that were turned into, super,
yeah.
and half of them are villains and half are good.
Yeah, I've always loved the sort of superhero genre because I feel like it's a celebration of people that are not just kind of stereotypical, people with
Yes.
abilities. And the truth is, I think there are so many people with these, what we would consider superhuman abilities out there,
Yes.
that most of them are afraid to be public because of, what might happen. They might get locked into, taken to a lab and experimented on or whatever. But I
Probably.
think this is becoming more and more open. And even, my ability seeing things, that other people don't see. I mean, there was a lot of fear that I had to overcome, but I'm glad that these kinds of shows are showing what's possible, because I think there's stuff that a lot of people can do, some of whom, by the way, may not be completely human,
Mhm.
can do, that most people would think is completely possible. And I have seen, myself, a lot of those things where it's just like I had to completely shift my idea of not just what was spiritually possible, but what was physically possible based on some of the things that I witnessed, through my experience.
Reality's malleable.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, this is I do think the good side of the entertainment biz right now is that this is how we're getting disclosure with these
Totally.
ideas, right? They're throwing it out there.
Yep. Mhm.
And because of the nature of collective thought and collective idea, we're now all aware that we have latent abilities, and like the X Factor, with the comics and now into films. We all know this, and we always knew this. But these abilities, once we start accepting them, we see them portrayed, we start accepting them in ourselves, and everything starts shifting around this.
Yeah, there's a show, if I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's called, Superhuman. It was executive produced by Stan Lee. I think they only did 1 season, but I loved it because what they did was they found people that had these really unusual, what they have labeled superhuman abilities, and they analyzed them and tried to figure out what's going on. And I feel like there's many more than, again, a lot of people are in secret. They're not talking about it. But, from someone who can be electrocuted to, have electrical charge running through the body that would kill someone multiple times over and they're fine, to someone who can roll a metal pan in his hand like it's paper, people that have what seems to be superhuman speed, all these kinds of things. I think there's going to be more and more analysis, and then also an expansion of what is possible, which I think is amazing.
And you just have to wonder if how much of that is naturally organic evolution or government meddling
Government meddling, like I
or
said,
both.
some people that have non-human DNA. I mean, I
Mhm.
think this happens quite a bit, and there's all different kinds of stuff that has mixed with humans, either because of, kind of sexual procreation, or because it's been done in a lab or whatever.
Right, right, and
I think
and
it's
we don't.
happened in a lot of different ways.
Right, and there's no way for us normal humans to actually understand what's in the genome, So it's just this concept
Speak
that
for yourself, Jer, on
no, no, no,
normal
no, no, no. I
humans.
mean, like you
Oh my
don't know
gosh.
all 10 trillion codes in there. You can't go in and read it. You can't say, "Oh, look, he's a reptilian because he's got this." But it's not like that. So for the rest of the world, it's just this nebulous thing, DNA. That they figured out. They figured out. I don't know where I was going.
I think that there's more and more that's being put together, and I do think that even when is being taken, there's probably some parts of it that's being analyzed in ways that we don't know.
I don't
Yeah,
think
it's
it's
just a
strictly a
really
three-dimensional
interesting
thing.
time. Yeah,
I think there's
yeah,
an
I think it's
energetic component, a etheric component to DNA.
Oh, I completely agree with you, and that part they're probably not able to analyze, but
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's what I was telling you about, like, the incarnated angel aspect, like, I know that's interplaying somehow. I don't know exactly how that works, but I know it's there, and I see that with others, and it's not just angels. I see incarnated fairies. I see, other mermaids, other types of beings.
Someone told me I'm a jinn, so who knows?
Wow,
Oh,
that's very fascinating.
oh my, I could kind of see that, Jer. I
There's
have a
a
question. I have
Oh,
a
yeah, go
question.
for it. Mhm.
Um, before we get to the end, I want to know, do you have advice for people on a way to protect themselves, especially as we move deeper into this? I had written this down. I wanted to get that for listeners that need it, especially since this
Sure.
suicide rates up and all that.
Yeah, so I'm a huge advocate of working with angels, and the angel I brought up earlier, Archangel Michael, is if there's only one angel that you call on or that you know the name of or whatever, let it be Michael. He's incredible. He's a protector. He can help with physical protection. Let's say you're in a situation where you feel physically unsafe, or emotional, spiritual protection. Let's say you're having a struggle with depression, suicide, negative thoughts about yourself or others. I've gotten the message that for people, we don't originate these kinds of negative thoughts, but we are often the victims of being influenced. And at the same time, once someone or some being starts to communicate with us some of these darker thoughts and feelings, we can choose to say no and kind of move forward, or we can take it on as our own. And once we accept that, we do become a part of that conversation. It does become ours, but it usually isn't ours inherently to start with. So just when you're thinking about your thoughts, first of all, ask, is this mine, or feeling as well? And if it's not yours, ask if it's something that you want to engage with. Even if it is yours, you can ask for the angels to help release it. But if it's not yours, it's very important to ask your angels and spirit guides, and Archangel Michael specifically, to heal, clear, and release anything that's not of the light, anything that's not helpful. And then I would add that it's important to ask for it to be taken permanently away, because this is something I learned the hard way. Like, angels are very literal. And I would say, take this being away. And then, like, they take it away. And then, like, a couple hours later, be back or whatever. And I was like, what's the deal? And they're like, well, it's going to stay like forever. And so they really do listen to our requests, very literally. So that's something to keep in mind when you're asking for help with protection or clearing or whatever it is that you want to bring in your life. If you're wanting, for example, more financial abundance, be clear and specific, and then ask for it to come in. Maybe that there's something that you're doing that's not aligned with that. But I, for example, would hear many people like asking for money or asking for abundance, and then they find a bunch of coins or find a nickel, or technically your prayer has been answered. So if that's not it, like, be clear. Right?
This
So
this just
anyway,
solidifies my belief that they're servitors.
servitors, what's that?
They're thought forms, highly energetic thought forms that you know are programmed, for lack of a better term. They have functionality,
Mm.
they have agency, but they don't deviate from what you tell them to.
Well, they can give guidance, that is quite complex. But I've learned in terms of asking questions and asking for help, that I think part of it is like they're allowed to operate a certain way, and they can't go out of it's almost like a program, like you're saying. You
Right, right,
can't go out of that. So we have to know how they work in order to utilize it effectively. So there
exactly.
definitely is nuance.
Same with
So it
demons.
Yeah, I agree with that. So if you want to learn more about angels in particular and how to ask for their help and how they communicate with us, my book, Angels: How to Understand, Recognize, and Receive Our Guidance, is all about that.
I've had this notion for a while that there are parasites, for lack of a better term, that have found their way into our grid, into the internet,
Mm.
into digital space. Have you encountered anything like that? Or have thoughts
Oh,
about that?
sure. I
Okay.
mean, and I think these kind of what I call entities are absolutely infiltrated into technology
Oh, yeah.
and the grid and internet, completely. So yeah, and that is something that you can also ask angels to protect. as well as your communication space, your technology. So before I learned how to do that, I had, I still have issues. It's not like everything is foolproof, but my God, it used to be just atrocious, like where everything technological would break down on me, and I'd have so many insanely weird malfunctions that like the IT department hated me, and like I still have glitches and things. But yeah, I absolutely think that's part of what's going on. And yeah, I really do think of these things as like energy parasites that feed on different emotion situations.
Mhm.
And
Like
you can,
buttons.
yeah, you can get more protected and also learn how to not get triggered by them. And then,
Yes.
they're like a parasite. If they don't get the food they want, they will move on. They're not going to stick around.
Yeah, and they hate when you used to get triggered and then you stop getting triggered. Ugh.
Oh, yeah, they do. And then they get kind of like almost in a panic about it.
I know. It's funny. What was my other question? Oh, no. You were talking about shifts coming up, and I had this thought the other day that that the Earth is magnetically coupled to the sun,
Hmm.
and the sun is going through it's the solar cycle is changing, and
Yeah.
I've heard other people say that it's going to flip. The sun's poles are going to flip,
Oh, interesting.
and
Mhm.
this has nothing to do with you. It's just I'm just putting this out there. If the sun's poles flip and it's magnetically connected to Earth, it stands to reason that the Earth's poles flip too.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion. I was actually just reading an article about that this has happened many times in
Yes,
world history, Earth history. When it's happened, it's usually taken a while. So, but
12,500 years. Mm.
right. So that said, the magnetic north, for example, is shifting like way
Yeah.
faster than it has
Yep.
typically, like several miles a year, like way more than normal. So yeah, I do think that this is likely to happen, but at the same time, um, still probably not like so dramatically that people are gonna, have
Yeah.
freak out and like
I'm not talking, it's not going to be an extinction event. Your GPS might not
yeah,
work for a while, but I just
yeah,
thought it was interesting that it was solar driven versus something that the Earth is. The sun flips, so we got to flip the method because we're beholden to the sun. We need the sun.
absolutely.
Right.
We rotate around the sun. I'm not a flat earther, so I
Allegedly.
still do believe that.
Oh, I think all space is fake. It's just a hologram.
Oh.
I'm crazy though. That's all I got.
How can so wrap us up on where people can find you in all of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. So for information on my psychic kind of spiritual work, you can find me at healingpowers.net. So my name is Laura Powers. That's tied in with my last name, healingpowers.net. And my podcast where we talk about a lot of the stuff that we were talking about on the show as well. It's called Healing Powers Podcast. You can find that on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, all the major platforms for podcasts. And then my books, I have 7 of them. They're on Amazon, all the other big stores. So that's under my name, Laura Powers. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at that Laura Powers. I'm on Facebook at Healing Powers. And then I'm on Instagram at Laura Powers 44. So feel free to reach out. DM me. My email is bookings at laurapowers.net if you have any questions as well.
This was a great pleasure, Laura.
Yes.
I'm so thrilled that we were able to get you a book and we're able to work this out, and just amazing. I felt very tapped in. You're definitely the real deal.
Oh, thank you.
For real.
Well, I felt that with you too, and it was my pleasure talking with you guys. Are really getting at the heart of some stuff that most people are not aware of. So I think that's great, and so happy that you're doing what you're doing. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And thank you everyone for listening. Be sure to come by next week when we have the obelisk. I'm not sure what the show is.
Next week already?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I think it's with Eric, but I'm not sure. I have it in the calendar as December, so I need to verify with. But yeah, that's it. There we go. Thanks for everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.